Welcome everyone. We're going to get started in this first lesson in character modeling by doing a blockout using polyspheres. I'm going to come under my light box, and in our projects window, if we slide down here, we should see a polysphere.zpr. So this is a project folder. Go ahead and double click on that. We don't want to save our current project, so just click no. And now we should see a polysphere out here in the center of our canvas. We should be in edit mode now, and you should see that it's got 3 subdivision levels. If you don't have your user interface loaded, go ahead and make sure that you're using this user interface. We'll be using this throughout the character modeling process. It's under Config, and you can go ahead and load the UI that was provided in Canvas. To get started, we don't want to be at a subdivision level of 3. We want to come down to the base level, which is 1. We can see that our active points have dropped down under geometry. You can also find that right here. This is our slider. Bring it down to a subdivision level of 1, and then we want to delete our higher. So let's go ahead and get rid of those. We have a much more faceted looking polysphere right now, and this is how we want to begin working with our layout, is in a really low subdivision. I'm going to bring in my reference image now for Spotlight by going under Texture. I'm going to click Import. I have a project folder set up, and within there I have subfolders that correlate with each of the projects due for the character model. I've also got my concept art here, and I'm going to go ahead and select this one. Now that it's loaded as a texture, I'm going to select that texture, and I'm going to come over here to Add to Spotlight. You can see that it's been added to the canvas. I'm going to go ahead and grab the scale on the dial right here and dial it down. And then I'm just going to drag it over here to the side. Now that I have this in position, I'm going to hit Z on the keyboard. That gets rid of the little dial right there, but Spotlight is still actually functioning right now. We want to go ahead and make sure that our Spotlight projection is deactivated by clicking off here. If you don't have this on your user interface, it can also be found under Brush. You can slide down under the Brush menu, under Samples, and this is where you have the toggle for the Spotlight projection. Let's go ahead and turn on our cam under Preferences, Cam View On. This way we know our forward-facing position. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the grid as well as perspective. And we're going to start using the sphere and duplicating it to create the main body parts as we break down the character in this blockout. We'll start with the crown of the skull. I'm going to zoom out here and place this up at the top. And I'm using this as my guide in terms of both the scale but also the placement, the distance for each of the parts. So I've got the skull lined up both in size as well as height, and I'm going to go ahead and just duplicate this under the subtool, hit W on the keyboard, bringing up the gizmo. I'm just going to use the green cone, which is the y-axis, and slide this down. This first one that we're making is the jaw area. It starts at the intersection of the eye, and we're going to scale it down. I'm going to come over to my side view. As I'm turning, I'm going to hold down the Shift key and snap that. That way we're snapped in to our side view. I'm bringing this forward in the position of the jaw. Let's go ahead and duplicate this. I'm actually going to bring it all the way out here. We're going to shape this one by scaling it down, then elongating it in the y-axis. This is going to be the neck. As we bring it over here, we're going to position it by rotating it forward slightly. I'm also elongating it quite a bit so that we can see an area that doesn't have pinching at the top or the bottom. It should be resting right about here, halfway between the bottom of the skull and the beginning of the jaw. We'll be making more adjustments to this later on. Right now we're just doing very basic placement of the primitive shapes. Coming back out here, I'm going to go back up to the skull, holding down the Alt key. I'm going to tap on it. That selects it over here in the Sub-Tool menu. I'm going to duplicate this and bring this straight down. This is going to be our rib cage. I'm going to bring it back here. And I'm not going to really shape this right now. We're just going to drop spheres in and we'll come back and shape. I'm looking at the length of the neck, knowing that there's going to be a few changes to this. And I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this 2 more times. It's going to represent the torso and the hips. I'm going to duplicate it, slide it down, duplicate it again, and slide that down. Right now we have a character that's looking very rigid and doesn't have a lot of form to it. Let's start shaping some of these to create that form. Again, I'm looking at the lineup here. I'm not quite on target. I'm looking at her crotch area and dragging that over here and seeing that I need to actually bring it down to about here. I'm going to make an adjustment to this so it's about halfway between the 2 spheres. I'm going to go ahead and start with the center one right here. This is the torso. I'm going to scale down uniformly. So as I work from a 3/4 view or a front view, we can see that I've scaled that down. I'm going to come up to the rib cage and I'm going to flatten this. From the side view, you'll flatten this based on the thickness of your character. We're going to do an important step right now, which is rotating this to tilt back. So this tilt is going to create the curvature in the upper back as well as push the rib cage forward. I'm going to come down to the torso again and I'm going to flatten it as well. And I'm going to bring it forward. This one I'm not going to rotate. It's straight up and down. But as I bring it forward, we can see that it's beginning to create this curvature. I'm going to hold down the Alt key. I'm going to click on the hips. I'm going to scale these down. And we're going to do a rotation on this as well in the opposite direction that we rotated the rib cage. So we're going to rotate it forward. And we're going to flatten it a little. Make sure you don't introduce any rotation in this manner. I'm scaling it in this direction and I'm pulling it forward. Right now, I'm going to scale this up just a little bit more. And though she has a thin torso, I want to make sure that it's not getting too small. So we want to make sure that we're building in this curvature here for the back, as well as the front of the character. As I rotate to the front here, we'll make some adjustments in the front view. Selecting the x-axis for scaling, I'm going to scale down her waist in this direction. Selecting the rib cage, I'm also going to do that and narrow this down. Don't worry too much about the shape right here. This should be more angled and triangular in shape. We'll be adding spheres that will be the start of the arms with the shoulder. For the hip, I'm going to widen her hips up a little bit here. And this does not really align with the outside of the thigh right here. This is more the inside area that we are looking at. I'm going to just back out here and take a look at my dimensions. Again, I'm lining them up with her. So she's fairly small up here. I've got a roughly 70-30 scale, and she has fairly large legs. Her legs are much thicker than her upper body. With that done, I'm going to start working on the legs now. I'm going to go ahead and select the skull and duplicate that, and I'm going to drag it straight down. I'm going to slide it over to the side. If this is pulling apart, you want to make sure that you've got your local transformations on. And you may also need to turn off symmetry. If you hit X on the keyboard, you'll see that it toggles on and off symmetry. Right now we can turn symmetry off since we're just shaping one side. Using the Y-axis scale, I'm going to elongate this. I'm going to scale it down and lower it into position. I'm looking at where her knee is over here on the leg that's flat on the ground, and it's just a little long. So I'm going to scale back. I'm going to move it in just a little closer. What I don't want to do is have the thigh cross over the center line. So I'm going to make sure that it is off to one side. From our side view, I need to push this back and line it up with the hips. We'll do some shaping here to make this area larger as well as taper it down when we begin shaping out the various body parts. Now that I have that in place, I'm going to duplicate again. This will be the lower leg. Again, I'm looking at the ankle lining up here and the knees lining up. For this one, I'm going to scale it down and elongate it. We should see about the same length in these two pieces. We shouldn't have a shorter lower leg and a longer upper leg. They should be relatively balanced. I'm going to move this just off center here so we introduce some curvature. Where they're intersecting right here is where the knee is at. And I'm going to go to the side view. And we don't want to see our legs in a straight line like this. We want to introduce an S-curve. So I'm going to push it back slightly on the Z-axis. Go ahead and check your proportions to make sure that they're lining up. I'm going to come to the front view here, hit W on the keyboard, and I'm going to take my spotlight projection and lay it over the body to see how it's lining up. I'm going to hit Z on the keyboard. I'm going to slide this over here, and I'm going to turn the opacity down so we can see through to our blockout in the back. I'm going to hit Z on the keyboard to turn that off. I want to make sure that I've got my skin shade 4 on so it brightens it up and I can see it a little better through the opacity of the spotlight projection. Right now I can see that my head is quite large and some of the scales are off a little bit. I'm going to scale this up and align this to her hips. So I'm looking at her hips here, her shoulders, her knee and thigh, the thigh and the knee position, and looking at the head is just too large as well as the neck. This could also shift up just a little, so I'm going to pull it up to elongate her torso. I'm going to select the skull and scale that down. As well as her jaw area. And I'm going to flatten it slightly in this direction so that the head is not round in the front view, that it's more oval shape. Okay, these are lining up much better. I'm going to select the neck. I'm also going to thin that down a little bit. I think I can scale down her rib cage just a little and move it up. Looking at her legs, they're just a little large. I'm going to scale them down. And position this over just slightly. With this done, I'm going to hit Q on the keyboard. I'm going to turn back on Spotlight Projection Dial here by hitting Z on the keyboard. I'm going to move this back over to the side and bring the opacity up. I'll hit Z again to close that out, making sure that my spotlight projection is turned off. Now that we have this done, I'm going to duplicate the jaw, hit W on the keyboard, and I'm going to pull this over to the side. Again, you may want to hit X on the keyboard if you're getting any odd stretching. Just turn your symmetry off. So this is going to represent her deltoid, or her shoulder area. I'm going to scale it down. She has fairly small shoulders. I'm going to position them. They slope down a little. And I'm going to go to my side view. From here, I'm going to center them and place them more to the back side here. Looking at the character from this view, I can see that she's craning forward just a little. I'm going to fix that in just a second. Getting the shoulder in place right here. I'm going to make some adjustments to the crown as well as the neck. Pulling the jaw back and scaling that down as well. The intersection of the forehead and the jaw right here should be lining up relative to where her eyes are intersecting with the upper and lower lids. We'll make some adjustments to that as we begin shaping this. Let's finish with the arm. I'm going to come back to my front view. I'm going to select the thigh, since this is the shape that we're going to be working with for the upper arm. I'm going to duplicate it. I'm going to bring this up and over. I'm going to scale it down, lengthen it. This will be relative to the scale of your character's upper arm. I'm going to rotate it. We're going to be posing our character in an A pose. I'm going to bring this back here. Lengthen it just a little more. And I want to make sure that I'm leaving a gap right here for the armpit. I don't want to see for now. I just want to make sure that I have at least a small gap right here. The elbow joint should line up with the hip joint when the character is in this position right here. We might need to scale this just a little bit more and bring it down like this. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this now. This is going to be the lower arm, and this is where we want to line up our elbow joint with the hip joint. So if the character lowered the arm down, we can imagine an arc right here and this elbow joint lining up with the hip joint. Go ahead and scale this according to your character's shape. I'm going to make these slightly smaller than the upper arm, assuming that her arms are tapering down, but you may have a character that has larger forearms. For the placement of the palm, we're going to go ahead and do a temporary one right now just to make sure that we've got the length correct. I'm going to do that by duplicating this, dragging it down, and I'm going to scale this down. This is the palm of the hand. And I'm going to duplicate it again, and these will be the fingers. I'm going to flatten these out so that they're thinner, make them a little bit longer. And the fingertips, if I draw an imaginary arc over here, they should line up at least to the center of the thigh or slightly below. So right now this is in a good position. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this and just do for a temporary thumb. I'm going to scale it in this direction, rotate it, and push that up into the temporary palm of the hand. And it should be placed more out towards the edge right here. For the palm of the hand, I'm just going to flatten it down. And push the thumb into position right here. I'll introduce a little bit of curvature here for the fingers. Make them a little bit thinner and not quite that long. Okay, so we've got a temporary hand in place for our block out to just make sure that we've got the length of our arm correct. Okay, so now that I have that done, we can pull back out here. Let's go ahead and make a foot. The foot we're making is going to be temporary as well, as we will be doing our costuming and footwear in Maya. I'm going to select the lower foot, duplicate it, drag this down here. I'm going to flatten it out. Come to the side, elongate it, and pull it forward. She has small feet, so I'm going to scale that down according to the size of her feet, as well as this direction. And I typically like to angle the feet out some. It's not necessary right now, but it does look a little bit nicer when they're angled out. Okay, this probably needs to have a little bit of an angle to it. I'm going to just tip it forward slightly and hit Q on the keyboard to end that. So we've got a basic layout right here with our character's center line, an arm, and a leg complete. Let's go ahead and mirror these over to the other side. I'm going to double click over here to open up my left side palette. In here I have my Z plugin docked. If you don't have it docked in there, you can come under Z plugin and drag this over and dock it. Under Subtool Master, we're going to mirror over each one of these. I'm going to start with the shoulder. I'm going to click mirror. It's going to bring this window up, and I want to merge it with the current subtool. This way, when I have symmetry on and I'm sculpting on one side, it will do the same on the opposite side. We are mirroring across the x-axis, and we'll go ahead and click OK. If we look at that subtool now, we can see that there are both of those in that same subtool. I'm going to continue this process for each one of the subtools moving down the arm. Okay, so we have the arm complete now. When we click on these, the other one should highlight. Let's go ahead and repeat this process for the leg. I'm going to select the thigh. I'm going to say mirror, making sure that I'm merging the subtool across the x-axis. Selecting the lower leg, mirroring that over, and the foot. Okay, so we can make some adjustments now. I can see that the legs are sitting out too far. I'm going to select the thigh by holding down the Alt key, hit W on the keyboard, and if I do this right now, we can see that they're not moving correctly. I want to make sure I've got X selected, and now they will move in together. I'm going to do the same here, making sure I hit X on the keyboard to bring up symmetry, and I'm going to pull those in and do the same with the feet. We can go ahead and see our very basic block out. Our next step is to start shaping our block out. We'll come back in another lesson to do that. Go ahead and place your character in the center of the scene. Try to line it up with your artwork. I'm going to hold down Shift and S, tap on it. That's going to create a duplicate in the buffer. And then I'm going to rotate this to the side and hold the Shift key down. With the front view and a side view in place, go ahead and take a screenshot holding down Shift, the Windows key, and S. That will allow you to take a snapshot of your screen. And you can save that off and post that into ShotGrid.